I want to begin by thanking our worthy opponents for their great, in fact, their historic work in promoting equal opportunity for all Americans. My colleague, Dr. McWhorter, and I, born in the time of the great civil rights triumphs in the 1960s, are ourselves the lucky beneficiaries of the struggles of Julian Bond and his compatriots. Likewise, as a college student during the 1980s, I benefited from a rich and diverse campus as a result of the policies that Lee Bollinger so eloquently defended before the Supreme Court. So it's quite an honor, indeed quite humbling, to be among these distinguished colleagues who have fought so hard for equal opportunity and diversity. However, I'm sure all of us will agree we still have a long way to go. There are significant racial gaps in health, in jobs, and yes, in education. But as bad as those disparities are, they are dwarfed. They are dwarfed by the wealth gap. In fact, if there were one statistic that captured the legacy of racial inequality, the persistence, the legacy of slavery, it would be net worth. The typical white family enjoys a net worth that is about 10 times that of the typical or median non-white family. What's more, that gap has grown since the civil rights triumphs of the 1960s. What's more, this asset gap explains many of the other disparities that I mentioned. That is, when we statistically compare African Americans and whites whose parents have the same net worth, something amazing happens. African American children are more likely to graduate from high school than their white counterparts. They're equally likely to obtain a bachelor's degree. And the wage gap between blacks and whites shrivels away. In short, the educational and economic problems of disadvantaged minorities stem primarily from nagging differences in class and wealth background. So if race now matters indirectly through its association with class, why do we continue to use it as a factor in admissions? Wouldn't a much more effective policy entail reducing the tenfold wealth gap? Or rather than redistribute wealth, what if we made wealth and our parents' educations matter less by implementing colorblind, class-based affirmative action in the areas of schooling and work? Such an approach would blunt several criticisms of affirmative action. First, because parental class is not as obvious as skin color, such a policy would be less stigmatizing. Second, under the current policy, 86% of beneficiaries of affirmative action come from the upper classes. By contrast, under a class-based approach, poor minorities and whites would receive a boost, creating a new politics of racial unity. Finally, with respect to diversity, immigration from predominantly black countries, new citizens from across Latin America, a resurgence in Native American identification, and self-identified multiracial Americans all translate to a country whose notion of historically oppressed minorities as distinct from other minority groups is not so easy to parse out. Finally, the evidence is that class-based policies can work. Take California, where Prop 209 banned the use of race at admissions. California's class-based policy has generated racial and ethnic diversity while being colorblind. We get to have our quote-unquote diversity cake and eat it too. Thank you.